Hi everybody, JG Pastor Jack here from Grassroots Motorsports magazine. We are at the Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park, the firm here in Keystone Heights, Florida, the official test track of Grassroots Motorsports magazine. Today we have a 2020 Honda Civic Si, 205 horsepower, 192 pounds of torque, and that legendary SI Honda badge on the back. We're going to be taking it out on track, doing a little bit of driving out there. See, we got a great day for the track here in the Florida, the sunny Florida winter. We're telling you about what we think about the Civic Si on track, and then taking it to the shop and taking it apart and seeing what we can see underneath the car. So let's start out on track, which is the best place to start with any Honda Si product. All right, so we are in the 2020 Honda Civic Si. About to go out and do a few laps here at the Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park, the firm here in Keystone Heights, Florida. Initial impressions as a track car. My only real complaint so far is that there's not a ton of headroom. My helmet, I'm actually leaned back a little bit more than I would normally like to be because my helmet is bumping the roof a little bit. This is a sunroof car, so it takes away a little bit of the headroom. It's not distracting at the level that I have it adjusted to right now, but it's a little bit, it's not the position I would choose to drive in if everything was ideal in this car. Aside from that, great sight lines. We got lots of cameras and data stuff set up in here. Still have great sight lines to all four corners of the car, and looking forward to getting the thing out on track and seeing how it handles. Hello again. It was a nice session here at the firm. Of course, this is the official test track of Grassroots Motorsports magazine here in Keystone Heights, Florida. Great little test track because it has a variety of corners. There's very square autocrossy type corners. There's a very long steady state banked corner. There's some flat steady state corners in both directions. So it's a great place to really ring out a car at medium and high speeds. Most of the corners are third gear, a couple of them you can try second, a couple of them you can almost even try fourth. So nice medium speed stuff, shows you how a car handles. And the overwhelming adjective I think that this car brings to mind is benign. It's a very, very easy car to drive. If I was putting somebody in a car for their first track day ever, they have no track day experience at all, this would be a great car to do it in because it never surprises you. It tends, like most powerful front-wheel drive cars do, tends towards understeer, but you can kind of drive around it. The throttle response of that small 1.5 liter 205 horsepower four-cylinder, it's a heavily pressurized engine, so the throttle response is it's a little soft. And what I mean by that, I don't mean to deride it for that, but when you hit the throttle, the engine responds, but the power swells in a very progressive way. It's not instantly there the way it is with a larger displacement motor or a modified turbo engine. So the power kind of swells into it. So you have to anticipate throttling out of corners, and you have to get to the power a little bit early, and then just sort of manage the traction of the front end with the steering wheel. In most of the corners, you can actually kind of go to where you see your exit and you have daylight past the apex. You just get all the way into the throttle, and then you manage your line a little bit with the steering for the rest of the corner. There's very few corners where you actually have to delicately balance the throttle all the way through the corner. So it's a fantastic novice car. And it's all right, so that was our immediately coming off track impressions of the Civic Si, a very driver-centric car, as all SIs have been throughout time. A car that you can go out and instantly feel like you're going 10/10s without a lot of warm-up, because it is so benign, it is so easy to drive. But what does the data say? Are there any mysteries hiding in the data? We hooked up our Apex Pro, and we're going to take a look at some of the charts now and see if there's any little interesting pieces of data we can find that tell us what the car is doing on track. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the data from our Apex Pro, and we can see a couple of interesting things here. So the laps I'm showing you, actually the lap traced in blue down there at the bottom, you can see the speed at various points on track. Towards the top, you can see where the cars are on track. The blue lap is our best lap, the red lap is our second best lap. But more importantly than that, I actually did a couple of things differently on this lap just because I wanted to see how the car behaved in different situations. So we can see as we start the lap here, you can see the cars, we'll zoom in on where the cars are right now. We have an area right here where we're actually accelerating around a corner, and we can see a very constant rate of acceleration that shows that the car puts down power very, very well. You don't have to back off of the corner at any point to keep putting power down. It actually responds to the throttle very, very well through there. So zoom ahead a little bit to what do I want to show you? Okay, here's another interesting spot. Here, we're gonna zoom all the way ahead to this area right here, which is a spot on track where at one point in the blue car, you see the blue car on the speed trace continues to accelerate, whereas the red car does not continue to accelerate. There's actually a place where I was hitting the rev limiter in third gear. So in the red trace, I actually held third gear for a few pings off the rev limiter. In the blue car, I shifted into fourth gear, and you can see it picked us up a few miles an hour there, entering that next corner. But the additional exit speed, or the additional entry speed of that corner, was easy to get rid of through the excellent braking of the Civic Si. The trace for the braking, we still had the same mid-corner speed, so it didn't upset the car at all to take that extra gear and then get rid of that extra gear. It didn't hurt our braking rate at all to have to do the downshift there. So nice job from the Civic at that point. The difference in speed there is mostly just a result of me getting a better run at the corner. You can see I've got a little bit better mid-corner speed with the blue car through this right-hander. So that mostly comes down to the driver. The next part I want to show you is this wiggly section here, which is actually fairly straight on the trace above, where you can see the GPS trace. But let's take a look at the car going through there. That's going to be this section here. So this section here at the firm, you can see the red trace just a little bit faster on the speed through there. The blue trace, fairly consistent. The difference there is on the red trace, I was actually all over the curbs there. I wanted to see how the car reacted to the curbs. You can see it didn't slow us down a bit. In fact, we're actually able to bounce over those curbs and go just as fast, if not faster, by holding the throttle down a little bit harder than we were able to in the
in the blue lap. Okay, so let's zoom ahead to this because this is very interesting. Um, this is the slowest corner on the track, and you see we're just exiting this very tight right-hander here. The blue trace is a lap that I went down to second gear to accelerate out of that corner. The red trace is a lap that I stayed in third gear, and you can see I got a little bit better exit on the blue trace, but the rate of acceleration is very, very similar. You can see that both traces climb at roughly the same rate. So I was coming out of there, around 3,200 RPM in third gear, or 4,500 RPM or so, 4,600 RPM in second gear. And you can see the rate of acceleration as we accelerate down to the next corner stays very, very consistent. So tells me that that torque, that very low torque peak, 1900 RPM, where the Civic Si produces its maximum torque, you can leave it in a higher gear and get away with it in a lot of situations. So that is pretty cool. So let's zoom ahead to another part of the track, which is going to be breaking into the final corner. And we'll take a look actually at our trail braking. You can see we're approaching the final corner here. We'll begin our braking, and we've got a little bit of a time differential here because I've done a couple corners better on the blue lap. But what I want to look at is I want to look at the bottom of this trace here and how the cars enter this corner and how our deceleration rate stays the same all the way, not only approaching this corner, but down to the apex of this corner as well. You can see as we're approaching this this final corner before the lights, our rate of deceleration trails off a little bit towards the apex, but the car allows us to brake and decelerate all the way down to the apex, which tells you it's a really excellent trail braking car. It allows you to sort of set the attitude of corner entry with the brakes as you enter the corner, and it allows you to come off the brakes nicely. There you can see that nice lower peak there. It starts climbing back up and accelerating out. So overall, this data shows me this is a very well-balanced car, which is exactly how it felt on course. It shows me that it does multiple things at well once, like accelerating and turning, like braking and turning, and maybe most importantly, it shows you that you have some options when it comes to digging out of slow corners. You do not necessarily need to go down to second gear all the time because you've got an immense amount of torque, very low in the RPM range. You can use third gear to dig yourself out of those slow corners. All right, so that's what the data shows from our Apex Pro data system. Let's get back to the track.
All right, we've been on track, we looked at the data. Now it's time to look underneath and see what magic we can find under the hood and in the chassis of the Honda Civic Si. So I'm gonna kick it to myself at the shop, and we're gonna take this thing apart a little bit, look underneath, look all around, and see if we can see what makes the Honda Civic Si tick. All right, so we've been to the track. We're now in the shop. Want to take a little bit closer look around, underneath on the Civic Si and see exactly what makes it tick. So let's start under the hood with this 205 horsepower, 192 pound-feet of torque, 1.5 liter turbocharged engine. Now, 192 pound-feet of torque might not sound like a lot, but the Honda Civic Si actually produces that amount of torque at 2,100 RPM. It's a little 1.5 liter four-cylinder engine producing that much torque at that low. That is really, really impressive, as we felt coming out of some of the slow corners. So let's take a look at what we can see under here. So fairly standard transverse layout under here, what we see in most modern cars. The engine is positioned fairly well forward of the center line of the axles. So that's going to be a lot of weight over the nose of the car. You know, it's just one of the peculiarities of front-wheel drive today. A lot of weights in the front, but the front end of this car does a lot of work and actually turns it into a fairly good handling car. So Honda's overcome some of those problems of that balance fairly well. I'm going to throw it on the scales here in a few minutes as well and see just what it weighs and see what that weight distribution is. So we'll find out exactly how much weight is sitting over the nose of this car. So again, a 1.5 liter, 4-cylinder. Look around to see if we can see anything interesting under here. Not a lot of volume of air coming in here. Really fairly small intake plenum here that comes from the air cleaner and into the intake manifold. So maybe some potential down the road to open that up, get a little more air volume going into the cold side of the turbo. Maybe getting a little bit more power out of this thing, a little more than that 205 horsepower. One of the things that we like to look at when we're under the hood of cars with struts in the front is to see if we have any slop or any sort of tolerances in these upper strut mount bolts, to see if we have any room to get a little bit more camber. So let me grab a wrench and we'll pull one of those off. So we pull an upper strut mount bolt off here. We can see that we actually do have a little bit of space there on both sides where we would be able to lean that strut in. Now this is a locating pin here, which might need to be removed in order to do that, but it does look like there is definitely a little bit of room. You can see the little bit of open space there that might allow us to tilt the top of that strut mount in and get just a little bit more negative camber, which would be a lot more beneficial at the track. Actually, torque, there we go. Under here, pretty excited that we might be able to get a little bit more camber from the upper strut mounts. Let's take a look underneath the car at the suspension and see what kind of magic Honda's working under there. So here's the front suspension. We'll poke around a little bit, see what we can see under here. First thing I'm noticing is everything is actually fairly substantial. If you grew up like I did with Honda Civics back in the 80s and 90s, you'll notice that all of the pieces are a lot beefier now than they used to be sort of back in the day. If you just look at like this sway bar end link, fairly aggressive there, and even the axle back in there, that axle, you know, that's probably 24, 25 millimeter thick axle shaft coming out of there, coming out of the transaxle. So some pretty you know, beefy stuff in the front suspension of this Honda. About 12 inches diameter on the vented front rotors. Single piston calipers. Brakes on these things work fairly well and actually let you do some modulation fairly well. This is the controller for the electronic shock absorbers, which we are fans of. Multi-link trailing arm in the rear. We'll get it up a little bit further and take a look at some more specific stuff. But again, if you've seen any Honda in the last really 20 years or so, since they went away from the beam axle and towards this is all fairly familiar territory. Very long shock absorber attaching up in the unibody there. Nice long control arms down here. Sway bar tucked fairly well inboard. And one thing I definitely want to look at once we get this thing further up in the air is to see what other adjustments we have for camber and caster and different suspension settings, both in the front and in the rear. One thing I really dig looking underneath this car is the fact that Honda has added some real human element under here and added paint marks to almost every threaded connection, even some of the press connections. If you look at even like the brake lines here, you've got two separate painted witness marks where you've got paint dabs lining up here red and then back here blue. So if that should loosen up, it'll be immediately visible what's going on there. Every single bolted connection, you've got actually here multiple paint marks, a white one and a blue one, so you can instantly see if the torque values or the amount of clamping force has changed on any of these fasteners. Every single connection back here, even down to this plastic push connection here, has some paint on it that has been added, that you can see instantly if that's been tampered with at all. So real shout out to Honda, because that's a human going, or a very, very skilled robot, but probably a human going through and marking every single one of these areas here, so you can instantly see if anything has been touched on this car or anything has changed. So when the car comes into a dealership and they got one of those long, hey, customer states, they have a place to go and instantly start visually being able to diagnose things. So with any performance car, one thing we like to look for when we're poking around underneath is any place we can get a little more negative camber, any place we can get really a little more aggressive suspension alignment for track or autocross use. So we look at stuff like the inboard control arm mounts here, and you can see on the rear, these upper connections are obviously slotted, but I don't think we have too much more room. We want to move that interconnection outward. I don't think we have too much more room to do that, just based on the way it's designed. So I don't really think there's any more available there. And the front bolted connection here, see if I can take a peek in there without tearing the car too far apart. Yeah, that's just a bolt through the control arm to the subframe, so nothing more available there. And out at the knuckle, of course, the way Honda struts work, it isn't a double, two bolt design like a Toyota, where you can actually change the angle of the knuckle. The knuckle angle is fixed here on the bottom of the strut housing, so there's really not much more available there. So the only place we can maybe get a little more negative camber is going to be out of the top mounts. Maybe lean those top mounts in just a little bit and get whatever we can get. Now we can probably play around with a few angles here. We might be able to shim this rear up or down. You're not going to be able to move that front much at all, but there are a few things you can do, and then there might be just a tiny little bit of slop in these ball joint connections here that you could get a little bit, but not much adjustability. Let me put Honda's car back together for him here before I forget and walk away with this push pin. Not much adjustability available in the front, but not really the end of the world, because it's already a very good handling car. It's always nice to know that there might be some adjustability available. Now for the aftermarket, there's lots of opportunities here to exploit. You could easily adjust the location of this lower ball joint mount to move things out a little bit. That would not be difficult at all to design something to bolt in place here. Different mount for the rear. So lots of opportunities there as well. So take a little bit closer look at the rear suspension here, and we do have some provision for camber adjustment in the rear suspension. We've got some adjustable cams here. Chris, why don't you come around behind me? That mount the rear control arms to the body, and you can see Honda's again done a great job at paint marking all of those where they set them from the factory. In fact, this one looks like it might have been adjusted at one point. Somebody sent this one in for an alignment because the cam adjust is off on this side where it's all lined up on this side. So this car's been in for an alignment already, and somebody moved it around. But we do have some provision for adjusting camber back here, and we also that's really going to be our only adjustment there, it looks like. Yeah, nothing really built in for toe adjustment. If you needed to, you could probably shim your upright out a little bit. Of course, you have to move this too, and that's not really designed to move. So toe adjustments would be tricky in the rear, but definitely have some provision for camber adjustments back there. So better than nothing. You can do some handling tweaks with the way it sits from the factory. Right there. The exhaust, actually very cool exhaust pipe here. It actually flattens out, comes out of this muffler, comes out of this pre-muffler round and flattens out into an oval design, and then continues back to where it splits here off into the two sub-mufflers. But a really complex piece of pipe here, the way it flattens itself and starts round here and goes to an oval tubing here. Just a lot of engineering and thought went into that, both to create more ground clearance and to keep the volume of the pipe big enough to keep flowing well. So no matter how well you design a car, you still cannot cheat physics, which is why we're going to now find out what this Honda Civic Si weighs. We're going to drop it down onto our Intercomp Quickway wireless scales and see just exactly how much mass we are throwing around the track with this car. Now, you may have noticed there is a set of wheels on here that did not come from the factory. To do our track testing, we threw the wheels and tires from our 2019 long-term Honda Civic Si project car on here. Instead of TR Motorsports wheels, instead of Falcon RT 615K Plus tires. I'm pretty sure I did that right the first time. So they're going to be about 3 or 4 pounds lighter per corner than the stock setup. So we're taking about 13 to 16 pounds off the curb weight to begin with. So factor that in as you are guessing on the way down what this car may or may not weigh. Let's do it. All right, down on the Intercomp wireless scales, and I'm pretty impressed here actually. With a full tank of gas, 2,924 pounds. So even adding in another 15, 16 pounds for our lightweight wheels and tires, we're still under 2,950 and still well under 3,000 pounds, which for a modern, fully safety featured, fully equipped sporty car, not half bad. We'll take a look at some of the proportional weights. You can see it's actually fairly well corner balanced without a driver in there. 50.38% on the corner weights, which for a car right off the factory floor, not half bad. Let's take a look at the front weights. Less than 60% of the weight on the front wheels, just less than 60% of the weight on the front wheels, 59.3% of the weight on the front wheels. So those front wheels doing a lot of work, but they're doing it fairly well, so we're not going to complain too much about that. And we'll take a look at side to side, driver's side. Nearly a 50-50 split side to side on the car, 50.21 on the driver's side. So overall, a very well balanced car. I'm particularly impressed with those corner weights. Actually, you can set up a track car for a long time and never really get close to those corner weights. So well done on Honda for putting together a very well balanced cars, as we found out on our Intercomp Quickway wireless scales. All right, nice job, me there with the wrenches and getting the weight under 3,000 pounds. Very impressive for a modern four-door sedan. So that is our look at the 2020 Honda Civic Si. Hope you enjoyed it. If you are heading out to a Honda dealer, I can personally give you my thumbs up that this is a fine automobile, whether you're autocrossing it, whether you're tracking it, whether you just want a fun car for the street. We have been long-term fans of everything with an SI badge. The new one is no exception. Thanks very much to the Florida International Rally and Motorsports Park for being the official test track of Grassroots Motorsports. All of our project cars, all of our cool press cars are tested out here 3 days a week. They have open track days, a couple $100. You come out and run all day. It's a lot of fun, great place to test. and it's within a couple-hour drive of any major city in Central Florida, and a couple more hours from almost any major city in the Southeast. So hats off to the firm here in Keystone Heights, Florida. If you are enjoying the content on Grassroots Motorsports Magazine YouTube page, check us out online at grassrootsmotorsports.com. You can check out our webpage, you can check out our print magazine there as well, and you can go right down here below this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will get first crack at all of the content we put up on YouTube. Thanks very much for watching. I'm JG Pasterjack. We'll see you again next time.